With the start of the Scarlet and Violet era of the TCG, the Pokemon Company reintroduced Pokemon EX, powerful cards that gave up 2 prize cards when knocked out and could be evolved into. Over 200 Pokemon EX have been printed since March of 2023, and many of them are either weak or outright terrible. So today, we'll be looking at some of the worst Pokemon EX from the most recent era of the Pokemon TCG. And starting off at number 10, we have Iron Treads EX, a Pokemon from the very first Scarlet and Violet set. For 3 colorless energy, Triple Laser deals 30 damage to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. Secondly, for 3 metal and 1 colorless energy, Cybernetic Wheel deals 160 damage and allows you to switch this Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. The biggest issue with Iron Treads EX is that both of its attacks are underwhelming for the purposes that they are meant to serve. Triple Laser and Cybernetic Wheel are both very expensive attacks for spread damage or hit and run strategies. Dealing 30 damage to 3 Pokemon can pressure low HP evolving Pokemon like Ralts or Dreepy, but requiring 3 uses of an attack to take spread KOs is very slow. As you try to set up an Iron Treads EX and damage across the board, your opponent can slowly evolve their own Pokemon to escape the damage range of the attack. Another issue with Triple Laser is how easy the attack is to counter. Putting a single Manaphy or Shaman into play prevents the attack from functioning. Having a 3 energy attack be so easily countered means it's almost never worth setting up. Cybernetic Wheel struggles due to its high attack cost for low return. The most successful hit and run decks throughout the game's history have used low-costed attacks with efficient damage output to damage an opponent's Pokemon before switching to a defensive one. In the Scarlet and Violet era, the most successful hit and run deck is a great example of this. For Relegator decks, use Relicanth's Memory Drive ability to let the Stage 2 Pokemon use Croconaws' Reverse Thrust attack, boosting the weak 30 damage to 150 with Relegator's Torrential Heart before switching to Mimikyu. The deck's damage output is boosted even further by including Moonkidori, a Pokemon that can move up to 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to an opponent's Pokemon. This strategy uses its combination of efficiency and synergies to attempt to outplay opponents. What's also worth noting about this Relegator deck is that it isn't competitively relevant, seeing very little top-level use. Iron Treads EX is inferior to Relegator in almost every way. Its attack costs more energy, do less damage overall when factoring in Moonkidori spread damage, and it gives up an extra prize card. Due to being outclassed by a single prize Pokemon, it's fitting for starting off this list. And at number 9, we have Flamigo EX. This colorless Pokemon has 2 aggressive attacks. For 2 colorless energy, Precise Beak deals 30 damage, plus 100 more if the defending Pokemon and Flamigo have the same amount of energy attached. Also, for 4 colorless energy, Brave Bird deals 200 damage, but deals 30 damage to itself. These 2 attacks provide no utility, being entirely focused on damage. In this regard, they are weaker than other cards which fulfill similar roles. Precise Beak's maximum damage is 130. Ideally, you'd be able to get this damage for 2 energy, since any further energy being used to power up this attack would be very inefficient. Dealing 130 damage for 2 energy is decent against lower HP Pokemon, but if your opponent is only attaching energy to their higher HP Pokemon EX, the damage output would be inefficient, often not even 2-hit KOing many Stage 1 Pokemon EX. Inefficiency is a common theme with this card. Brave Bird's 200 damage for 4 energy with the downside isn't an effective means of doing damage. If you had to power this attack up with once per turn energy attachments, it would be outright bad. Luckily for Flamigo EX though, there are a lot of synergistic cards for colorless Pokemon, saving this card from the bottom half of this list. Glass Trumpet is an item card which can attach any basic energy from your discard pile to 2 of your bench colorless Pokemon. As a result, even though Brave Bird's attack cost is very high, it is possible to use it as soon as the first turn of the game, going second, albeit that's very unlikely and requires a lot of setup. In order to offset the recoil damage from Brave Bird, you could use 2 Bouffalints to reduce all damage dealt to Flamigo by 60. Sadly for Flamigo, there exists a far superior colorless Pokemon in Terrapagos EX that attacks far more efficiently and has higher damage output and better utility while being overall tankier. When you put these 2 Pokemon EX side by side, it's clear Flamigo EX is terrible. And at number 8, we have Reshiram EX, a painfully mediocre attacker. For 1 energy, Fire Wing deals 40 damage. Also for 2 fire and 1 colorless energy, Scorching Fire deals 200 damage at the cost of discarding 1 energy from itself. This Pokemon falls short of one of the most crucial damage benchmarks in the game with its attacks, 210 HP. If Reshiram EX's Scorching Wing attack dealt just an extra 10 damage, it would be capable of one-hit KOing a variety of stable Pokemon EX, like the Fezandipiti EX, Latias EX, and Wellspring Mask Ogerpon EX. If any of these Pokemon had taken previous damage, such as from Fire Wing, Reshiram EX could then secure the KO. But why play a Pokemon which requires on a 2-hit KO without providing any other utility? Dragapult EX, one of the best Pokemon EX in the game, is similarly incapable of taking bit one-hit KO knockouts, but makes up for this fact by spreading damage across your opponent's bench. Reshiram EX even compares poorly to other basic type Pokemon. Gouging Fire EX Blaze Blitz deals 260 damage for the same energy cost as Scorching Fire, with a different downside that's easy to alleviate by switching the Pokemon out of the active spot during your next turn. Also, for the same energy cost, you can attack with the second Reshiram EX card. Although Blazing Burst is weaker initially, once your opponent takes 2 prize cards, it outdamages Scorching Fire. If your opponent has 4 or more prize cards, the attack is capable of taking one-hit KOs against nearly every meta-relevant Pokemon. Like nearly every other card on this list, with such better options around, there's no reason to play the original Reshiram EX. And at number 7, we have Absol EX. This Dark-type Pokemon has 2 attacks which care about your opponent's hand. For 1 Dark Energy, Future Sight lets you look at the top 3 cards of any player's deck and put them back in any order. Also for 2 Dark and 1 Colorless Energy, Cursed Slug deals 100 damage plus 120 more if your opponent has 3 or less cards in hand. Absol EX is at best a mediocre card. Many basic Pokemon EX have attacks which deal 200 to 220 damage for 3 energy, usually with a slight downside or a condition to deal max damage. Cursed Slug fits within this category, dealing its maximum damage output of 220 only when your opponent fulfills a certain condition. The problem with this attack is both its cost and the requisite condition. Basic Pokemon EX with these types of attacks are usually used in aggressive decks to quickly threaten opponent's Pokemon. Miraidon EX has Electric Generator to attack as soon as the first turn, solidifying this strategy as a consistent metagame threat. In the current standard format, there are very few ways to accelerate Dark Energy to a Pokemon. Outside of Crispin, a card which works better alongside better cards, it will take 3 turns to power up Cursed Slug. Not to mention the attack's extra damage is based on something your opponent can manipulate. Unless you play Iono or Unfair Stamp to force your opponent's hand to be 3 or less, your opponent could just maintain a hand of 4 or more to have Absol EX's damage output. When your opponent has control of how much damage your attacks can do, your Pokemon isn't going to be very effective at taking KOs, especially when comparing it with similar Pokemon in the format. And at number 6, we have Lugia EX, the second colorless Pokemon on this list, and the first Pokemon on this list to have only a single attack. For 30 colorless energy, Hyper Whirlpool deals 140 damage, and lets you discard energy from your opponent's active Pokemon up to the number of consecutive coin flips you win. Lugia EX has 1 theoretical niche it could fulfill. Hyper Whirlpool can, depending on how lucky you are, discard all energy cards from an opponent's active Pokemon. Energy Denial is a powerful effect in certain circumstances, made obvious with cards like Crushing Hammer being a staple in control decks for years. Despite the potential upside of discarding endless energy from your opponent's active Pokemon, Lugia EX has seen no competitive play for a variety of reasons. The biggest of these is the standard format metagame surrounding Lugia. Within the 2025 standard format, Energy Denial is extremely weak due to nearly all of the best decks featuring energy acceleration or very low attack costs. To demonstrate this problem, here's both Gardevoir EX and Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX. Gardevoir EX's ability allows the player to attach endless psychic energy from their discard pile to their Pokemon at the cost of putting 2 damage counters on the attached Pokemon. Against this deck, energy discard is completely useless. A similar story is true for Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX. This Pokemon's Punk Up ability attaches up to 5 dark energy from your deck to your Marnie Pokemon in any way you like. With so much energy easily accessible, the odds Lugia EX's Hyper Whirlpool will be meaningfully disruptive are incredibly low. The randomness is the other major factor with Lugia EX. Hyper Whirlpool will only discard an energy half the time you use the attack, with any other subsequent energy discard also being a 50-50. Randomness on attacks oftentimes means that Pokemon won't have the consistency to be viable. With how mediocre Hyper Whirlpool's damage is, the attack isn't particularly effective without winning multiple coin flips. Even if you do win multiple coin tosses with one attack, with how easily decks can rebuild energy on board, you may need a miraculous string of 1 flips multiple times. Due to both being highly reliant on coin tosses and very poor positioning into a format where cards with energy acceleration run rampant, Lugia EX can't fulfill its intended role. And at number 5, we have Amoongus EX, a card with the potential to be extremely annoying. For 1 grass energy, this Pokemon's Spore Ball attack deals 30 damage and makes the opponent's active Pokemon asleep. While asleep, a Pokemon cannot attack or retreat. Also, in between turns, the control of an asleep Pokemon flips a coin. If heads, their Pokemon wakes up and is no longer asleep. For 1 grass and 1 colorless energy, this Pokemon's second attack deals 100 damage, plus 80 more if you win a coin toss. Jumping on Swing as an attack is either mediocre, if not outright bad, with 180 damage for 2 energy being enough to 2-hit KO any Pokemon EX. But that's hardly unique. If you wanted to maximize your odds of winning with Amoongus EX, the best role it could fulfill is that of a trapping card. Pokemon with attacks such as Maractus's Corner have been a common presence within the standard format. This attack prevents opponent's Pokemon from retreating. By using Boss's Order to force a Pokemon that can't meaningfully attack into the active spot, you can lock your opponent out of the game until they run out of cards in their deck. On paper, Spore Ball potentially fulfills a similar role, with a constantly applied sleep preventing an opponent's Pokemon from attacking or retreating. In fact, the attack has a legitimate upside to Corner in that even Pokemon with energy attached and capable of dealing significant damage can be trapped. However, relying on sleep to trap an opponent's Pokemon puts you at the mercy of coin tosses. If your opponent wins a coin toss at the end of your turn, your opponent becomes no longer inhibited, rendering your Amoongus EX near useless. As a result, the card has seen no experimentation in serious play, and likely never will. And at number 4, we have Dragonite EX, a stage 2 Pokemon with all of its power behind a coin flip. For 1 colorless energy, Wing Attack deals 70 damage. Also for 1 water and 1 electric energy, Mighty Meteor deals 140 damage and flips a coin. If heads, the attack deals 140 more damage. But if you fail the flip, this Pokemon can't attack during your next turn. Now, there is so much wrong with this Pokemon, with Mighty Meteor exemplifying almost everything which can make a Pokemon's attack bad. First and foremost is Mighty Meteor's energy cost. By requiring 2 different types of energy, the attack is inherently more inconsistent to pull off than other attacks with single type requirements. Throughout the course of a game, if you draw only one of your 2 energy types, the attack is made totally unusable, whereas other decks don't have the risk of drawing energy that can't satisfy an attack cost. Adding on to this inconsistency is that Dragonite EX is a stage 2 Pokemon, requiring more time or cards to set up than a stage 1 or basic Pokemon EX. Adding on to the consistency issue is the attack itself. Dealing 280 damage for 2 energy is actually quite good, getting 1-hit KOs against all basic and most stage 1 Pokemon EX. Much like other Pokemon cards on this list though, the attack's maximum damage output isn't reliable, with a single lost coin flip potentially being game losing. For whatever reason though, having your damage output isn't the only downside to failing a coin flip with Mighty Meteor. In addition to losing out on 140 damage, Dragonite EX can't attack during your next turn. Granted, this is not a difficult downside to mitigate, since switching Dragonite EX out of the active spot would allow it to attack again. But the prospect of this coin flip reliant Pokemon dealing half as much damage and being unable to attack half the time it uses its main attack easily puts it towards the bottom of this list. And at number 3, we have Keldeo EX, the most recently released card on this list. For 1 water and 1 colorless energy, Gale Thrust deals 30 damage plus 90 more if this Pokemon moved to your active spot this turn. Also for 1 water and 2 colorless energy, Sonic Edge deals 120 damage and ignores all effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. This Pokemon's main issue is its attack simply not doing enough damage, with both Gale Thrust providing no utility and Sonic Edge's effect only having a use case into specific matchups. Keldeo EX's worth as a competitively viable card is dependent on how effective it can knock out opposing Pokemon, and it massively flops in that regard. We've mentioned various important damage numbers in the Pokemon TCG throughout this video, and how other cards on this list have missed those vital benchmarks like 220. Keldeo has completely forsaken any chance of reaching this amount of damage output, with both its attacks capping out at 120 damage. It's enough to pick up Pokemon like Munkidori, but almost any Pokemon EX worth the cardboard it's printed on can do that. In matchups against wall Pokemon like Mimikyu or Crustle, Sonic Edge can help push through annoying abilities, but this role can also be fulfilled by any non-EX card. Many decks otherwise reliant on Pokemon EX often play a few decent non-EX attackers exactly for the purpose of removing stalling Pokemon. Keldeo EX works in this regard for any deck with water energy, but it competes for that role with every other water type Pokemon and often loses out. For example, the last meta-relevant water deck was Shenpao Baxcalibur. If this deck ran into Mimikyu, a card Shenpao couldn't damage, the deck could attack with Baxcalibur, giving the card 2 roles of being the deck's main engine and tool for beating wall cards. It's difficult to picture a metagame where Keldeo X is an effective card. Its damage output is far too low, and its utility is not needed. And at number 2, we have Snorlax EX, a card which commits the greatest sin of TCG card design. It's extremely boring. For 3 colorless energy, Strength deals 80 damage. Also for 4 colorless energy, Toss and Turn Press lets you flip 3 coins and deal 120 damage for each heads. On paper, this Pokemon can deal 360 damage with just 1 attack, enough to one-hit KO any Pokemon EX in the game. Just like every coin flip card in this list though, max damage doesn't tell the full story. Snorlax EX has no real use case due to its unreliability. Toss and Turn Press will on average deal 120 or 240 damage. An enormous difference when you consider 120 tickling anything that isn't a basic or a stage 1 non-EX Pokemon. You can high roll and deal 360 damage for big surprise knockouts, but that'll only occur, statistically speaking, once every 8 uses of the attack, tied with the odds of the move dealing 0 damage. These heavily odds-based cards are extremely difficult to justify taking seriously with how variable their effectiveness is. A bad card like Flamigo EX, with usually lower but consistent damage output, will be more appealing to players because the card adds no extra elements of randomness. There's also no real reason to think about Snorlax EX beyond giving it to new players. Dragonite EX is a bad card due to its pretty laughable attack, but a unique downside, weirdly enough, makes the card stand out amongst other bad cards. Snorlax, by comparison, is extremely vanilla. The template of an attack with no effect, plus higher cost attack with coin flips, is found on so many bulk Pokemon cards used to pad out set sizes. Snorlax EX fits with these cards nicely as blatant pack fillers not intended to be used outside of a player's very first deck. And lastly, at number 1, we have an 8-way tie between Greninja, Lucario, Melmetal, Armorouge, Sprigattito, Darkrai, Houndstone, and Pikachu EX. Each of these cards was originally released in Japan as a product intended solely for beginner children, but were imported into the non-Japanese products through various promotional products or within main sets. Each of these cards is equally and intentionally weak, if not outright worse, than single prize Pokemon, and so it makes sense to cover the cards together. Otherwise, these very basic and terrible cards would prevent cards which are bad in more unique ways from entering the conversation of the top 10 worst EX Pokemon. These 8 cards each do less damage than other EX Pokemon while having absolutely no utility. To illustrate this, compare Greninja EX with its Terra counterpart. For 2 energy, Shifting Shuriken deals 100 damage plus 100 more if you win a coin flip. Terra Greninja EX, meanwhile, can deal 170 damage for 1 energy while adding any 2 cards from your deck to your hand. Also, for 1 water and 2 colorless energy, this card could deal 120 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. For 1 extra energy, the promo Greninja EX has a 50% chance to deal 30 more damage than Terra Greninja EX without the flexibility of searching 2 cards or being able to choose between a second attack. Every single one of these 8 Pokemon EX are just like this, being outright worse than other cards with the same costs. All of these Pokemon were intended for a very simple, low power level product meant for children. However, that product didn't release outside of Japan, and all these terrible cards were integrated into other products, leaving many players heartbroken when opening their packs and seeing these EX cards. The 8 starter product cards are by far and away the worst Pokemon EX in the TCG.